All right, so welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be focusing on, I think, something that we can all relate to, whether we're formally teaching or just trying to share knowledge with somebody.
Right.
Um, and that is like the fundamentals of how to teach. And so for this deep dive, we are going to be taking our insights from a really interesting virtual workshop, specifically a transcript of a YouTube video titled Ramadan Virtual Pavilion Jeddah FLS, uploaded on the Happy Learning channel.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. Even virtually, these conversations about teaching always seem to come back to these like core elements, right?
Yeah.
So our kind of mission today is to really unpack these foundational areas for you, offer some practical insights into effective teaching that you can connect with, regardless of like what kind of learning environment you might be in, or even if you're just curious about how people learn.
Yeah, exactly. And from this workshop, four key areas kind of emerged, and we're going to be exploring these today. So we have giving information, teacher's language itself, how to manage the learning environment, which is classroom management, and
Mhm.
then finally the relationship you build with the learners.
Right.
Okay, so let's dive right into the first one, giving information. So it struck me that the conversation started in a slightly unexpected place, didn't it?
You did.
One of the participants immediately mentioned classroom management as like a basic area.
Yeah, and I think that immediate recognition really underscores how central classroom management is
Yeah.
in the day-to-day reality of teaching. But it also sparked a really interesting thought about how other essential elements fit into the picture.
Yep.
For example, planning came up pretty early on in their discussion.
Right, planning. Yeah, it's like so obviously important. But the question they raised is planning really its own fundamental area? Or is it more of something that just kind of like underpins everything else? What's your take?
If we look at like the big picture, right, of what makes
Hmm.
a lesson work, I think planning really feels like that structure that supports all four of our core areas.
Yeah.
You plan what information you're going to share. You think about how your language will convey that. You plan for creating a productive learning environment. And you consider how your plans will ultimately affect your connection with your learners. So while it's vital, it might function as more of an overarching framework, I would say.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like the architect's blueprint before any construction begins.
Right.
Okay, so then when they started talking about actually the act of giving information, there was a really interesting emphasis on moving beyond simply explaining things in a traditional
Yeah,
sense.
this shift towards more active engagement. And
Hmm.
they highlighted the value of eliciting information from students, drawing out what they already know,
Yeah,
rather than just lecturing, right?
right.
Recognizing learners aren't coming to the table empty-handed. They have their own experiences and understandings.
Absolutely. It's tapping into that existing knowledge base. And then crucially, they talked about how important it is to have a crystal clear learning outcome or goal in mind every time you present new information. It can't just be information for information's sake.
So this raises a really fundamental question, I think, for anyone sharing information,
Mm.
right? What do we want the listener or learner to do with this?
Yeah.
And they emphasize the need to directly connect that initial information to the activities and projects that follow.
Yeah.
They shared a really practical example of like analyzing riddles, like using the analysis of riddles leading to a descriptive essay.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it all ties together.
Yeah, that's a powerful insight. It's about making the learning journey feel purposeful.
Exactly.
And this connects so well with that idea of showing, not telling, which they illustrated with the example of using timelines to teach different verb tenses.
Think about how much more intuitive it is for you to see a visual representation like a timeline when you're grappling with something like a verb tense than just hearing rules.
Yeah.
It really resonates. It provides like an anchor for understanding.
Yeah, and for those who have ever tried to explain something to like a group with different levels of understanding, the strategy of scaffolding instructions for diverse learner levels is key.
Yeah, and if we connect this to that broader goal of making learning accessible to everyone,
Hmm.
scaffolding is recognizing that individuals are at different points.
Right.
So by offering varied levels of support, like more detailed instructions for some and more open-ended guidance for others, you ensure that everyone can engage and participate meaningfully.
Right.
It prevents some from feeling lost
Yeah.
and others from being bored.
Exactly. Okay, so that was a really helpful breakdown of giving information. Let's move on to our second area, teacher's language. And now this isn't just about teaching a specific language like English or whatever, it's about the language the teacher themselves uses, right?
Right, precisely. And they define teacher's language as the teacher's own proficiency in the language of instruction.
Okay.
It's their ability to communicate clearly, accurately, and confidently in the classroom.
Yeah, and it makes sense that a strong command of the language you're teaching in makes navigating the complexities of a classroom much smoother.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not getting bogged down trying to find the right words or struggling to express yourself.
And what's really interesting is that they recognize that teachers can and do improve their language skills over time
Yeah,
through practice and exposure.
yeah,
And there's a really nice point about teachers sometimes learning from their own students.
yeah. That's a refreshing perspective, that the learning environment is a two-way street.
Yeah.
But they also highlighted that strong language skills, they're a tool.
Yeah.
They need to be paired with solid knowledge of the subject matter to be truly effective.
This raises a really important point about the role of language in conveying information, right?
Right.
It's the vehicle.
Yeah.
Without a good handle on the language, even deep expertise in a subject can be difficult to communicate to others.
Yeah, that's how you get it across.
Right.
Okay. So then the conversation moved to, I thought, some really relatable classroom moments, which is those pronunciation disagreements that can come up with students.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Things like British versus American English, or even like president versus precedent.
Yes.
And the strategies for handling these were very practical, like
Yeah.
checking Google, explaining that different varieties of English exist and are valid, and then crucially using these moments as impromptu mini lessons about the, nuances and sometimes quirky nature of language.
Turning a potential point of contention into a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
It's really skillful.
And then they talked about how it's important to keep the main objectives in sight, even when these language-related questions come up.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
Absolutely. While it's important to acknowledge and address student questions, you also need to be mindful of the overall learning goals for the session. It's about guiding the conversation in a way that answers the question effectively without letting it completely derail you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's move into our third core area, classroom management. This was, as we noted earlier, something that one of the participants brought up right away as a fundamental aspect of teaching.
Yes,
And then they quickly established that planning is a foundational element.
it is.
And within that, the challenge of time management came up.
Yes, the age-old problem of running out of time.
Right. They offered some potential reasons for this, like not having super clear objectives,
Yeah.
over-explaining concepts,
Yeah.
and just, trying to cram in too many activities.
Right.
And I thought it was interesting that they specifically emphasized how crucial it is to allocate enough time for what they called the productive stage, that part of the lesson where the learners actually get to apply what they've been learning, whether it's speaking or writing or doing something practical.
Yeah, and we would connect this back to what we said earlier about learning with a purpose. The productive stage is where understanding really solidifies.
Yeah.
It's when learners move from passively receiving information to actively using it. And if you constantly find yourself running out of time for this crucial stage, you might not be seeing the full impact of your teaching.
Absolutely. There was also a mention of, the shift from being the sage on the stage, the one doing all the talking,
Right.
to being more of a guide on the side.
Right. Facilitating learning rather than just delivering information.
Yeah. And then another key point was the idea of monitoring activities rather than individuals.
Oh, yeah, that's an important distinction.
Yeah, so what's the distinction?
Okay, so focusing on monitoring the activities themselves means that you're observing whether the students are engaging with the task in a way that supports the learning objectives,
Right.
whether they're using the target language, if that's relevant,
Okay.
and whether they're generally on track with the lesson goals. It's less about policing individual behavior and more about ensuring the learning activities you've planned are leading to the desired outcome.
And they even had a bit of a discussion about how involved the teacher should be while monitoring, like whether to actively participate in group work, for example, or to observe more from a distance.
Both approaches have their benefits. Active participation allows you to give immediate feedback and support, and it can help you build rapport, but it can also be intrusive, right? And it could limit the students' autonomy and their ability to problem solve independently.
Yeah, it's true.
Observing from a distance gives them more space to work things out themselves, and it can provide you with a broader view of how the class is progressing as a whole.
Right.
But it might mean missing opportunities for timely intervention for struggling learners.
Yeah.
So the key, I think, is finding a balance and being strategic about when and how you intervene.
Yeah, okay. And then in terms of just the very practical aspect of managing time during a lesson, they mentioned setting timers.
Yeah,
Simple, but powerful, right?
absolutely. Having that visual or auditory reminder can be incredibly helpful for both the teacher and the learners to stay focused and make good use of their time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to our final core area, which is relationship with the learners. And this just feels so foundational, like no matter what you're teaching.
Oh, it really is.
Yeah.
They emphasize the significance of rapport, that connection and mutual understanding that you build.
Yeah.
But they made a really important distinction between pleasing and appeasing.
Ooh, yeah. Okay, explain those.
Okay, so pleasing, the way they described it, is about doing a good job as an educator, meeting those learning needs, and providing quality instruction.
Right.
Appeasing, on the other hand, is about keeping everyone happy by letting students overly control the class, maybe even to the detriment of the learning goals. It's the difference between being a respected guide and just trying to be a friend.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction.
It highlights the balance of building positive relationships, but still maintaining an effective learning environment.
Right.
It's not about being authoritarian, but it's also not about being a pushover.
Yeah.
It's about creating a structured yet supportive space.
That friendly but firm approach.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and making students feel valued. It seems to start with something as fundamental as knowing and using their names.
Yeah, absolutely. Using someone's name is a basic sign of recognition and respect. It acknowledges their presence and helps to foster a more personal connection.
And the importance of treating all learners equally and avoiding any hint of favoritism.
Fairness is essential for building trust and a sense of community. When learners perceive that some individuals are being treated preferentially, it can breed resentment.
Yeah, that's so true. And then respecting moments of silence from learners while also encouraging participation. Another one of those delicate balances.
Yeah, recognizing that silence can mean different things.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a sign that someone needs more time to process information, while other times it might indicate a lack of confidence.
Right.
The key is to be observant, create a safe space for sharing, and find different ways to encourage even those who are more hesitant.
And then they discuss the value of using learner profiles as a way to better understand individual needs.
Absolutely. Understanding a learner's background, their learning style, and any anxieties they have about speaking can inform your teaching strategies and allow you to provide more personalized support.
And then addressing the reasons behind a lack of speaking, like, for example, insufficient vocabulary, by proactively providing that support.
It ties back to the idea of equipping learners with the tools they need to succeed.
Yeah.
If someone is hesitant to speak because they feel they lack the language, providing that support directly addresses the barrier.
Yeah. And then there was this really insightful point that participation should be a means to an end, not the end itself.
Exactly. Meaningful participation should flow naturally from engaging activities and a supportive environment.
And then finally, one of the participants shared this really lovely idea that teaching is like literature. It should both delight and instruct.
Beautiful. It really captures the essence of effective teaching,
Mm.
engaging and informative.
Okay, so after this deep dive into these 4 fundamental areas, the participants then turned inward. And they engaged in some really valuable self-evaluation, reflecting on their own weaknesses.
Yeah, self-awareness is so crucial for growth.
Mm.
Recognizing where you could improve is the first step.
Yeah, so interestingly, time management and the tendency to over-explain vocabulary were some of the common challenges that came up. And that feeling that your efforts are never quite enough.
Yeah, that resonates.
Right. And even the observation that the first session of the week sometimes feels weaker.
Interesting.
It's interesting to note those patterns.
It highlights the ongoing nature of learning and development.
Yeah,
There's always room to refine our approaches.
for sure. And they shared strategies for improvement, like consciously setting timers, engaging in peer review, just having that open mindset.
Right.
The fact that these kinds of workshops and discussions can spark that self-reflection is great.
Sharing experiences and perspectives can provide fresh insights and help you identify areas for growth you might not have even been aware of.
Yeah, it's like that not knowing what you don't know thing.
Exactly.
And ultimately, they emphasize the importance of humility,
Right.
recognizing there's always more to learn, regardless of your experience.
Humility fosters a growth mindset.
Yeah. And then when they turn to discussing their strengths, giving information effectively, building relationships, having a good command of teachers' language were some of their strongest areas. It's just as important to acknowledge what you're doing well.
Absolutely. Recognizing your strengths builds confidence
Mm.
and allows you to leverage those areas while working on others.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so as we bring this deep dive to a close, having explored giving information, teacher's language, classroom management, and the relationship with learners, it's really struck me how interconnected these fundamental aspects are.
They're not isolated skills, they work together.
Yeah, it's this holistic approach to teaching.
It is.
So, as you've been listening to us talk about these four areas, I'd love for you to consider what aspect of learning or teaching do you personally find to be the most critical? What's the key to those really meaningful aha moments?
Yeah, a good question.
Yeah, something to think about. And looking ahead, we are planning another deep dive that will focus specifically on classroom management. We'll explore everything from seating arrangements, interaction patterns, building rapport, instructions, monitoring, and feedback.
I like it.
So be sure to join us for that further exploration. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.